Yesterday, people asked me what time I was going to speak. I said, oh, it'd be about 11, so I would support you sleeping in till noon. Thanks for being here, and I would like to echo the thank yous that have been given this morning to the many people, too many to name, who have spent a year putting this all together. It's great to be here. It's great to be here among friends. And I'm going to be talking today about the web that we've woven over the years among ourselves and within our collections. And it's really kind of an amazing thing to reflect on, to think about how we've pieced together our own collections and how many years we've been doing that. I bought my first bottle at age 17. I was 17, not the bottle. I was still in high school. 4 years later, I found myself establishing with a group of other people an antique bottle club that just held, I think it's its 52nd annual show. How many of you have ever been to a bottle show? That's a great number. I'm pleased to see it. Well, you know them. It's kind of a secret, but you can't go to a bottle show without seeing stoneware. They are definitely related. And we have the joy in Minnesota every year of having lots of Red Wing at our bottle show. So if you find yourself looking for something to do next April 6th, and you're near Bloomington, Minnesota, come to the bottle show. You'll see some of the usual suspects selling some pretty neat old bottles, but they'll also have, many of them, some pretty neat old Red Wing. Mostly advertising jugs, but you never know what else is going to show up. I was lying in bed this morning early, because I woke up early. I was thinking, you know, maybe I should start with a joke. And I'm thinking about the time when Ole was not feeling so good. He was, in fact, the doctor said he didn't have too long. So his friend Sven came by and we sat with him for a while. And he says, geez, Ole, I feel so bad. Is there anything I can do for it? And Ole says, well, I can smell that Lena's baking in the kitchen. Would you give me a cup of coffee and one of those brownies? So Sven disappeared for a moment, and he came back with that cup of coffee. And he hands it to Ole and says, here you go. And Ole says, oh, that's Lena's coffee, so good. But where's the brownie? Ole says, I thought I was going to get a brownie. Sven says, I'm sorry. Lena says those are for the funeral. Thank you so much. All right. We do weave a tangled web as we are collecting. I want you to take a look around and just make a quick note of how many of your friends are in the crowd here today. We are among friends, and I'd like to assure you that this is a safe place. What do I mean by that? Well, I say we're safe because we are not like the others. You know the ones I mean? Have you ever shown your collection to someone and all you get is a blank stare? I have a high school buddy. Years ago I showed him my collection. All he could do as he walked out of the room was pat me on the back and shake his head. He didn't get it. Those are the people who didn't inherit the collector gene. I was collecting for about 10 years before I was married. My wife is not a collector. And she'll be the first to tell you, I didn't get that gene. She's kind of proud of it. Well, in fact, one day a few years ago, and this is a direct quotation, my wife Chris said, I don't like other people's old things. They probably sold them and went out and bought something they really wanted with the money. Well, okay. But she's a good sport, and she allows me to conduct my collecting business unencumbered. We can get carried away with that, though. There's a t-shirt out there that I kind of admire. It says, it's not hoarding if your stuff is cool. And I think we're pretty cool. So, here's the question. We know that we're here because we like Red Wing stuff. Crocks and jugs, art pottery and dinnerware. I'd like to see a show of hands. How many of you collect something besides Red Wing? There it is. There's that collector gene. All right. I want examples. Go ahead, shout it out. What else do you collect?
Baseball cards.
Baseball cards.
Straight edge razors.
Drinks.
Straight edge razors.
Straight edge razors. Okay. Insulators.
Indian pottery.
Pottery. Indian pottery. All right. Listen to this. It's a reverberation of collectibles. I love it. And we're all connected by that. There's a web. And there are strands, and we're all strands in that web. And it's a big web. But it connects us all. And all I can do today is share with you some of my experiences in building my web. My collection's beyond Red Wing, if you will. I've already mentioned I started pretty early, but there are many strands in my web. So here are some examples of the bottles I collect. You'll see here, top left, patent medicine bottles from the 19th century. Top right, you'll see historical flasks dating from about 1820 to 1870 or so. Lower left, Ritter's bottles, another kind of patent medicine, very popular with collectors. Lots of alcohol in those, so they were big sellers. And over on the right, lower right, some poisons. And these are just a few examples. But I want you to notice how beautiful they are, in color and in form. I also collect old advertising. I love the graphics that we don't get to see anymore today as far as advertising goes. They knew how to make a lithograph back then. And these are all color lithographs on tin or cardboard. Advertising, no surprise here, bottled products. That's my thing. But you know, bottles and stoneware are closely connected. They were in their day made by skilled craftsmen, forged of earth and fire. Rock hard, but at the same time quite fragile. They were once utilitarian, every day. But today we appreciate them as folk art, as pieces of aesthetic beauty. So here on the left we have employees of the Minnesota Stoneware Company, and on the right, employees of the Illinois Glass Company. They had a lot in common, and in fact, they gathered for these pictures, and if you look closely, it's probably pretty hard to see the details here, but several of the gentlemen in here are holding either product, like a Minnesota Stoneware jug, or in the case of the glass blowers, there's a whole case of bottles sitting in the front there, and they're holding the implements, the tools that they use to create those bottles, blowpipes and items of that nature. And it's also important to note that they worked in similar settings. They were hot and dirty, no air conditioning. In fact, glass houses, because they had those huge ovens, they didn't have a kiln outside, they had a huge oven from which they drew the glass to blow the bottles. They used to shut down in the summertime. It was just too hot to work. But both groups produced pieces that served similar purposes, and they even shared similar forms. On the left, a jug dated 1882, hand-scratched, that's a Red Wing piece. It's hard to recognize. In fact, when I acquired that piece, I didn't realize what it was. I was giving a seminar at a bottle show in California, in Sacramento, back in 2016. And after the seminar was about Western advertising jugs from Red Wing, because I felt bottle collectors in the West need to realize there's a lot of good Red Wing out there. And a fellow came up after and said, "I've got a piece of Red Wing that you might be interested in." And he showed me a picture of this jug. And I said, "Well, I don't think that's Red Wing." He said, "Oh, yes, it is." And he turned it over. He showed me a second photo. It's hand-scratched. Red Wing Stoneware Company. Red Wing, Minnesota. Just a little side note there. But you'll notice on the right-hand side, if you've ever been to Cape Cod and visited the Sandwich Glass Museum, that's a piece of sandwich glass. What do they share in common? Well, they're both jugs, if you will. They're both handled devices for containing and pouring, well, liquor. Herman Sporing, the gentleman who had those jugs produced, owned a saloon on the main drag of St. Peter, Minnesota. How about some canteens? On the right, a Red Wing canteen, hand-painted, 2 flags, and the words, "Our Nation's Pride." On the left, our national hero from 1898 Spanish-American War, Admiral Dewey. And again, some flags. So, patriotic motifs on canteens. So even though these were utilitarian pieces, they also were beautiful. Who doesn't like a Target crock? They're gorgeous. Well, imagine that same scrolling on a flask, and you have what we call a scroll flask. 1840 to 1860. Very popular, it comes in a lot of colors, cobalt blues, ambers, greens, aquas, produced by several different glass houses, but just a very popular motif, and it held whiskey. Typically, that's what they were for, these flasks. Came in pints and quarts. If you've ever had the good fortune of visiting either the Arabia Museum in Kansas City or the Bertrand Museum in DeSoto Bend, Iowa, in both of those exhibits, which show all kinds of things from sunken riverboats, you will see these scroll flasks. They were on their way to the gold fields in Dakotas and Montana. And don't we love our birds? One just sold this week, and another one in the auction tonight, right? In fact, that's a picture of the one from tonight's auction. The one on the left, thank you to Crocker Farms for allowing me to use that image. A beautifully executed eagle. Well, imagine that. They loved them on flasks too. These are what we call historical flasks, and in this case, they're double eagles. There's an eagle embossed on either side. These were so popular in a period from about the Civil War up until about 1880 that there are 200 known molds, 200 different molds used in glass houses across the country to blow these flasks. That's how popular they were. So it's kind of impressive. And they're beautiful. Again, they come in lots of colors. I'm happy to say these are all part of my collection, and I really love them. We also have the national heroes. I mentioned Admiral Dewey. Well, here's George Washington. Again, thank you, Crocker Farm, for letting me use that image. And on the right, an image of George Washington. Our first president appears on no less than 60 different molds of these flasks. Now, when our craftsmen took a break, they gave us what we today enjoy and call lunch hour pieces. We have a nice collection of those in the Pottery Museum. And perhaps one of the most favorite and most rare, Boy with Crock. I was lucky enough to have family in the Red Wing area. My mom grew up here. And that Boy with Crock sits on my shelf today because it came to me through my great aunt. So it's a favorite, as you might imagine. The craftsman who made these, we don't know who. This was never a commercially produced piece, but it certainly is appreciated. This one is fun. Red Wing didn't actually produce bottles per se in large quantities for commercial purposes. But at some point, well, 1925, right in the middle of Prohibition, when we couldn't officially and legally be drinking and producing booze, a potter named George Hemplin, who happens to be a known Red Wing potter, decided to have some fun with a piece of brushware. So he created this piece, and he dubbed the product name Maiden Breath. Kind of a fun allusion to booze. But then he also, instead of writing on it bottled in bond, which you'd expect from a government booze product, it's bottled in barn. And instead of being guaranteed 99.9% pure, it's 99% poor. A really fun piece of lunch hour, if you will. And, you know, people are part of our web too, and in this case, I'm remembering Tom Bartnuski. I bought this from him several years ago. So it has a special place in my collection. This is a group of Red Wing ladies who graduated high school in the early 40s, right out of Red Wing Central High School. Kneeling right in front of that group is my mom. And some of her friends. some of whom I got to know as I was growing up. There were actually a dozen of them, and they called themselves the Does. When my mom was working at the pottery, she grabbed a blank piece of what Larry Roshan this morning told me was a part of a salad set, and she decorated it with the names of all of her friends and put Does on the front. She did it. It's a lunch hour piece. Mom didn't work in the actual production. She was in payroll, so everybody loved to see when Mom came walking through because she had to pay checks. But at any rate, she created that plate. And that sits in my collection today, too. I'm very happy to say. Those ladies, there were a dozen of them, they got together once a year or more for lunch well into their 70s. They had a great tradition going. So I've just talked a little bit about lunch hour pieces. Well, as you might imagine, glass houses had lunch hours too. And they produced, glass blowers produced items which are referred to by collectors today as whimsies. Not lunch hour pieces, but whimsies. So here are some glass whimsies. A couple of pipes, the green one is a pipe, the blue one is a pipe. Above those you'll find a glass hammer, not terribly useful, but kind of fun. And a glass powder horn. And sometimes those glass powder horns actually were put into use. Another not terribly useful whimsy was the glass cane. That's an exhibit, it's a photo of an exhibit you would find at the Shelburne Museum in Shelburne, Vermont. And right next to the exhibit is this pinned photo, if you will, of George Lutz of Toledo, Ohio. He was a glass blower. And you notice he's kind of dressed up here, looking rather dapper with his glass cane. Turns out, glass blowers were one of the first unions ever formed. Glass blowers decided to unionize. They were very proud of that. And this is a photo taken of George Lutz with his red, white, and blue cane on Labor Day. Those glass blowers all blew red, white, and blue canes and carried them in the parade on Labor Day, signifying the pride in their union. Today, those glass canes are quite collectible and fun. And they often are in red, white, or blue. So being a bottle collector, it's fun to find bottles to go with your stoneware. We know that Red Wing made several different Watkins jugs, different sizes, different stamps on them. So why not throw in together with that some Watkins bottles? In this case, in my collection, a Laxatone, quack medicine if you will, and sewing machine oil. And there is a photo of a Watkins salesman who has kind of posed this with his wagon, and up in the wagon sits a farmer and the farmer's daughter, and down below is the salesman pitching, in this case, what looks like a bottle of Watkins liniment. Photos are a great way to find Red Wing. I'll talk a little more about that later. Now this isn't a Red Wing jug, it's probably from Fort Dodge, but it advertises a Minneapolis liquor dealer, A.M. Smith. And A.M. Smith was prolific in his advertising, so I've been able to acquire quite a bit of it. A couple of nice serving trays, a calendar, and some very beautifully labeled bottles. Part of the fun of collecting is learning the history behind the piece. And right up behind us here, we have some books that go into deep detail about the history of the various Red Wing advertising pieces. Pretty nice. Now, A.M. Smith didn't stop here. This is just a small example. He was prolific in advertising, gave out pocket knives, decks of cards, kitchen utensils, shot glasses, beer mugs, and as you imagine, they all had his advertising on them. And as it says here, A.M. Smith's California Wine Depot. Now, A.M. Smith came to Minneapolis right around 1880. But before that, he was in Salt Lake City, Utah. And if you can find one of his Salt Lake City, Utah flasks, well, there's only one full one complete one known. And it sold about 10 years ago for $25,000. He moved from Salt Lake City to Philadelphia in 1876 to celebrate the nation's centennial. He thought, well, that'd be a good place to be selling booze. And he was right. He did very well there. And then moved to Minneapolis. Eventually he became a used car dealer because Prohibition shut him down. Couldn't sell it anymore. We know because of the Red Wing Ledger that Towels Log Cabin Maple Syrup Company ordered these little 4-inch sample jugs, if you will, in the shape of a log. And they're stamped on the bottom, Towels Log Cabin Maple Syrup. So it's fun to collect some things to go with that. A trade card and one of their early tins. In this case, a little sample, just a couple inches tall. Early on, it was mistakenly said that these White Rose rye whiskey liquor jugs were made in Red Wing. Well, we know that's not true. They were most likely made by White's Pottery in Utica, New York. But we love them here, and they still show up at the show and sale every year. And they are beautiful. But what we get to collect along with them here in this area are the bottles and the advertising. That advertising sign came out of an attic of a liquor store long since closed in Wanamingo, not far from here. I can't quite recall where I got the labeled bottle, but those are great go-withs, and they're strands in that web of my collection. They all connect pretty nicely. So I'm happy to have them. Red Wing made 3 different jugs for William Radham's and his microbe killer. Radham was a botanist from Texas who cooked up a quack medicine that made him very rich. And there were many other jugs made by other potteries around the country and even in Europe. At one time, Radham had 17 different laboratories around the world producing this quack medicine. And why not? Because as it says on the bottle, cures all diseases. It came in 3 strengths. And this little trade card here explains the different strengths. Strength 1 was, coughs and colds, nothing too serious. Strength 2, you were a little sicker. And strength 3, well, if you were taking that, you were hanging on the drop edge of yonder. When they finally caught up with Radham, and they did, they closed him down. They did some testing and found that his microbe killer was made up of branch water, sulfuric acid, and cheap wine. It's fun to know that Red Wing was connected to some of the breweries. One of the most popular Breweriana pieces in the hams world is the Red Wing Bear Bank. They are very popular both among Red Wing collectors and brewery on a collector, so there's a pretty interesting crossover there. The tray, well, let's say the bank is from the 1960s, the tray is from the 1890s. And Hams is still produced today, not by the Hams Brewery, but it's a very collectible brand of beer. Another Minneapolis brewery, Glick, from northeast Minneapolis, right along the river. Red Wing made that mug. And on the right you have what we call a vitrolite sign. It stands, I don't know, a couple feet high, and it's actually a lithograph on milk glass, and it's curved so that you can put it in a corner. They're called corner signs. So again, my strands span a lot of years, but they're connected to Red Wing. I'd like to thank Mike Hedrick for allowing me to use this photograph of his. T.P. Navin, Val Blatt's beer, out of Mitchell, South Dakota. And together with it I have a beautifully etched beer glass. That's about a 5-cent glass of beer right there, back in the day. I mentioned photographs earlier. Well, this is a photo that was taken probably sometime in the 1920s, maybe early 30s, before Prohibition was repealed. What you see there is a pile of copper stills, and standing proudly next to them, a couple of revenuers, if you will. The guys who tracked down and broke up this bootlegging operation. Notice all the coils of copper lying in the foreground. But lower right-hand corner, if you look carefully, I don't know, what do you think, 10-gallon?
Looks like a 10-gallon.
Maybe a 10-gallon crock? You can see the wing, you can't see the numbers. So somebody was putting our fair Red Wing pieces to illicit uses. Can you imagine?
Imagine, yeah.
One of my favorite pieces happens to be a translucent jug that I picked up at a flea market many years ago. Now this is a photo from the Minnesota Historical Society. I own a copy of it. But I love it because it shows the whole fleet of Glenwood, Englewood delivery wagons. And if you look closely, you'll see, not so much in those in the foreground, but in the background, you can see the distinct lineup of jugs in those wagons. So they were still delivering, and this was taken using crockery. A fascinating photo. Sometimes you get lucky and you find a group of guys out drinking. And right in the foreground, there are 3 jugs, one of which is stamped. I think I saw one right back on that table this morning. William Steinmeier, Milwaukee. And we know that Red Wing made some of his jugs. So another web, or another strand in the web, is photos of the stoneware that we collect. And of course, once you get to know Red Wing, you don't just leave it at Red Wing stoneware. You start to pick up other Red Wing items as well. In my case, no surprise, bottles. So here's Red Wing cough syrup from W.M. Sweeney, and a Kemp Pure Liquors strap-sided amber liquor flask, probably dating to the 1870s. maybe the 80s. How about a little pocket mirror advertising Freeburg and Esterly? That was a saloon at 226 Plum Street. Let's not forget Red Wing Brewing Company. A couple of beautifully etched advertising glasses that would have been filled with a nickel's worth of beer and served to you across the bar. Well, this week we're here getting our fix of Red Wing because it is kind of an addiction. I had a friend tell me once he thought I should be in a 12-step program. But it's healthier than that. And our Red Wing heritage is what we've joined together here to celebrate, and the history it represents. And it lets us remember that the webs we build with our artifacts are also webs that allow us to weave in friendships. So thanks, Rick Matinsky, for letting me use a photo from one of our newsletters. In this case, images from the 2023 Winter Convention. And it's our collection of friends makes us all part of one another's web. And really, there's nothing more valuable than that. Thank you.